Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today I'll be taking you through how to pace the Math No Calculator section. Keep in mind, I'm someone who's scored perfectly on the math section of the SAT on back-to-back SATs, so I'll really be trying to give you insight into how you can pace the Math No Calculator section and use a strategy in order to increase how efficient you are in taking the Math No Calculator section and improve your chances at seeing easier questions earlier on and maximizing your odds at a higher score. So really trying to help you strategize based on the way that the SAT Math No Calculator section works. So I'll be giving you insight into how it's organized and how you can use that organization to maximize your chances to get points. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, also make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And let's go and get started with number one. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand with how we're going to pace the Math No Calculator section is we need to understand how the difficulty of the questions is arranged. Okay, so what we need to know is that the difficulty of each question on the Math No Calculator section is different, okay? There are questions that are easier and questions that are harder, okay? So we have questions that are multiple choice, which are the questions 1 through 15. They get more difficult as we go on, right? They increase in difficulty as we go from problem 1 to problem 15, okay? After problem 15, we have problems 16 through 20. Now, problems 16 through 20, those are free response. So there are no A through D. You have to come up with your own answer and then fill in the bubble sheet. So while the questions get more difficult as we go from 1 through 15, from 15 to 16 we actually see a drop in difficulty because questions 16 through 20, they start at that fairly easy difficult level, right? And then they grow increasingly more difficult as you go from 16 to 20. But question 16 is generally easier than question 15 because we drop in difficulty from the end of that multiple choice section to that start of the free response section of the Math No Calculator. Okay, so if we understand that, we can adopt a strategy to take advantage of that and make sure that we're answering the easiest questions or the easier questions rather than the harder questions first. That way, we're making sure we're maximizing our chances at getting points. Okay, so here I'm going to give my opinion on difficulty equivalencies. So what do I mean by difficulty equivalencies? Well, the free response questions, right? We know that question 16 is easier than question 15 of the multiple choice, right? So if we understand that, we want to understand how difficult each free response question is in comparison to the multiple choice. That way we're not answering question 15 on the multiple choice, which is super hard, and then leaving question 16 of the free response, which is generally easier, blank because we ran out of time. So in order to do that, we need to understand what they're equal to, right? So in my opinion, question 16 of the free response is equal to questions 1 through 6 on the multiple choice. So what I mean by that is that if we were to take the 10 SAT practice tests that have been released, and we select question 16 from a random one of those 10 practice tests, okay? In my opinion, it's likely that the difficulty of that question 16 would be comparable to a question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 from one of the multiple choice sections, okay? Now, question 17, in my opinion, would be comparable to questions 4 through 9 on the multiple choice. So it could be comparable to question 4's difficulty, or question 7 difficulty, or question 9's difficulty. But either way, we see question 17, it's more than likely easier than whatever question 10 through 15 is. Okay, next, we've got question 18. In my opinion, question 18 of the free response is generally as difficult as questions 6 through 10 of the multiple choice. Okay, we see question 19. I believe that that one's generally equivalent in difficulty to questions 8 through 12 of the multiple choice. And question 20, we see that that's generally, in my opinion, equivalent to the difficulty of a question 9 through 12 on the multiple choice. So one thing you may notice is where is questions 13 through 15 here? We've talked about how questions 20 is equal to 9 through 12. Well, what are questions 13 to 15 of the multiple choice equal to? Well, they aren't equal to any free response, in my opinion, because in my opinion, they tend to be the most difficult. Okay, so questions 13 to 15, in my opinion, tend to be the most difficult on the SAT Math No Calculator section. So understanding this is going to affect our order in which we answer these questions because we want to maximize our points. Okay, so we want to make sure we're answering the easier questions before we go to the harder questions, because if we start doing the harder questions and we run out of time, then we just left those easy points on the table. Okay, so how is this going to impact our strategy? Well, this impacts our strategy because, like I said, we want to make sure that we're answering those easiest questions first, and we want to avoid wasting too much time flipping between pages. Okay, so these seem like two contrasting ideas, right? If we're going to be answering the easiest questions first, then wouldn't we want to do 1 through 6 of the multiple choice, then go do 16, then do 4 through 9, or then do 7, 8, and 9 of the multiple choice, then go do 17? Well, yes and no, okay? we want to make sure we're answering the easiest questions first, but at the same time, we want to avoid wasting too much time flipping between pages. Okay, so here's what I suggest. Okay, I suggest that we answer multiple choice questions 1 through 9 first. Okay, those generally are going to be fairly easy. Now they will grow more difficult from 1 through 9, but overall, as far as the SAT Math No Calculator section goes, they are fairly easy problems. Okay, so my recommendation is we answer those first. Okay, the second thing we're going to do is after we answer 1 through 9, at that point, we flip the pages over to the free response section and answer 16 to 18. Okay, so the reason that we do that is because if we were to just go and do 1 through 6, then go do 16, then do 7, 8, 9, then go do 17, then go do number 10, then go back to 18, we're wasting time flipping pages. Okay, so that's why I don't recommend that we just do that. Okay, because then we're wasting time flipping those pages, and I don't want to do that so much unless it's really worth it, which is why I want to answer multiple choice questions 1 through 9 first. Then at that point, I flip and I go answer those free response questions 16 through 18. Okay, by doing that, I've answered these easy problems first because these tend to be the easier problems of the Math No Calculator section. Then I'm answering the other easier problems of the SAT Math No Calculator section. So now what happens after I've answered questions 16 through 18? Well, at that point, if we look at our difficulty equivalence sheet, we see we have question 19. We know that that's equal to around 8 through 12 of the multiple choice. Well, we've already answered 1 through 9, so our next one would be 10. So do we answer 10 first or do we answer 19 first? Well, if they're equivalent in difficulty level, we want to make sure we're not wasting the time flipping the pages and going back and forth. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to try to stay right here with that free response if we can. So here's what I recommend, right? We just answered 16 through 18. We've already answered 1 through 9. At that point, what I recommend doing is glancing at questions 19 and 20. Okay, so just take a quick look at them, see how long they are, see if it's a really, really long word problem, see if it's just something that really stands out to you as a trick that I explained, such as adding to get rid of variables to solve for one. So that's one thing that you can do. And if you're watching this video not as part of our 90-day SAT prep series, I recommend going and watching our 90-day SAT prep series because I explain certain setups on the SAT math section that you can use to improve your score. So I'd recommend watching that. It's a 90-day SAT prep course. It's free on our channel, so you can go find that. This video is embedded in that 90-day SAT prep course, so if I make references to it, understand that that's why. I'm also releasing this as its own video, so there'll be a little bit of a go-between between those. But as I said, so once we answer 16 through 18, we want to take a look at 19 and 20. Now, if something jumps out to you as easy, right, if it jumps out to you as one of those patterns or tricks I've explained that can help you get to the answer choice very, very quickly, then go ahead and do them next, okay? If you look at 19 and you see a stacked equation sheet like I talk about, say it's 3x plus 2y equals 10, and say the next one is, we'll say the next one's also 3x minus 2y equals 20, right? And we have to solve for y. We see we can go ahead and use that subtraction there to get rid of x and then solve for y, right? So these 3x minus 3x is going to give us 0. So if you see something like that and it looks really easy to you, go ahead and do it next, right? If you see a pattern or a trick that I've explained, go ahead and use it next because that's going to be really easy and quick. Now, if you glance at 19 and 20 and you see that they're going to be difficult, right? You see it's going to be more like a 12 than something like an 8 or a 9 or a 10, right? You see it, you see, okay, this is going to take me like 3 minutes to solve. Then you're going to want to go ahead and go back and answer 10 through 15, okay? Because if 19 and 20 look really, really difficult, which it's possible that they could because they're at the end of the free response section, then at that point we'd say, okay, let me go back and answer 10 to 15 or 10 to 12, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a minute. I just misexplained that, okay? So if they look easy to you, then you're going to go ahead and do them next. And then after you've answered 19 and 20, then you go back and answer 10 to 15. Now, if they look difficult, okay, if they look difficult and they look like they're going to take you 3 or 4 minutes to solve each, then you're going to want to go back and do 10 to 12 next, okay? Now, after 12, though, I recommend going back and answering 19 and 20 before we answer 13 and 15 because, like I said in my difficulty equivalence thing up here, we see 9 through 12 is equal to pretty much 19 and 20 here, right? 8 through 12 is 19, 9 through 12 is 20, but we see 13 to 15 are going to be the most difficult, generally, okay? Keep in mind this is in my opinion and it's generally. Okay, so in that situation, what we want to do is if we glance at 19 and 20 and they look difficult, then at that point we go back and answer 10 to 12. After answering 12 then we go back and answer 19 and 20 before we answer 13 to 15. That's in my opinion. Now, keep in mind, if you glance at 19 and 20 and they look easy, go ahead and do them next. Then at that point, all your free response questions are answered and you go answer 10 through 15. Okay, so that's what I recommend there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If not, just take a look, right? I really outlined this pretty clearly. Notice my steps here. I've got what I'm going to do first, and I'm going to put this in blue so you can see it. I've got what I'm going to do first, or I'll put it in, let's see, I'll pick a different color. I'll pick green. Give me one moment. I'm going to pick green. Okay, I'm going to put this in green so you can see it. Okay, notice how I put these in numbered order, and then they also have A and B, right? That's the order I suggest you do them in, right? So number one, you're going to answer multiple choice questions 1 through 9. After that, you're going to answer 16 through 18. After that, you're going to take a look at 19 and 20, and then I provide 2 different pathways. So we have pathway A and pathway B. So this is where you're going to make a judgment call on your own. So you're going to glance at 19, 20. If they look easy, you go ahead and do them, and at that point, you just have to answer the rest of the multiple choice. If they look difficult, then go back and do 10 through 12 next, and then after 12, go back, answer 19 and 20, and then go do 13 through 15. Okay, so that right there, if you want to write something in your notes, this would be the big thing that I'd recommend writing in your notes if you're going to follow what I recommend. All right, so why is this approach smart? So let's really dive into why it's smart. Well, it's going to maximize our chances at points because answering questions 1, 2, or 3 is going to give us the same amount of points as answering 15 correctly. Okay, so the way the SAT math scoring works is it's just based on the number of correct answers you get over the number of possible correct answers you can get, right? So if you get, there are 58 total questions on the SAT math section. So the way your math score is calculated is it's the number you get correct out of 58, right? So there's a scale it'll have, but that scale is going to be based on the number of correct answers you get out of those 58 total. So what you're going to want to understand then is that you're getting the same amount of points for answering 1 correct as you get for answering 15 correct, or answering 2, right? Well, answering question 2 or question 3 or question 1 is much easier than answering question 15 because question 15 is going to be harder. So we're always going to want to make sure we're answering those easier questions first because we get the same amount of points for doing so. Okay, so that's why that's smart. Another reason it's smart is it prevents you from running out of time while you're working on a harder problem like problem 15. And then if you run out of time, you left points on the table because you probably could have solved 2 of those easier problems in the same amount of time it took you to solve that really hard problem. Okay, so in that sense, it's very efficient. Okay. Now, some people who are shooting for perfect scores on the math section, keep in mind I scored perfectly on the math section. If you're shooting for a perfect score and you think there's no chance you'll ever see a question you don't know, this is still a good strategy for you. Okay, you may be thinking, oh, I'm just going to go 1 through 15 as fast as I can. That way I don't even have to waste time flipping between sections. Okay, that's a bad strategy. Here's why you need to use our strategy still. Okay, the strategy that I recommend, it is the safest way. Okay, keep in mind if you're taking the SAT, usually it's only offered about once a month. Now, do you really want to have to stay fresh and stay studying for another month just because you decided not to take this strategy and you risk leaving points on the table? You don't. Okay, you want to make sure you're playing it smart and playing it safe, and this is the best way to do that. So you're still going to want to use this strategy. It's worth it to take that extra 10 or 15 seconds it's going to take you to flip between those pages in order to make sure you're solving those easier problems first. Okay, so understand that. Okay, now here's another big thing with the SAT math no calculator section. Okay, this is a question that I've gotten. How much time should I have left after I answer all my questions? So let's say you've taken this strategy that I've recommended. You've gone through, you answered, I'll go back up. You've gone through, you've answered questions 1 through 9. You answered 16 through 18 after that. Then you looked at 19, 20. They looked easy, so you went ahead and you solved them. Then you answered 10 through 15. Let's say you did that. How much time should that take you and how much time should you have left after doing that? Well, in my opinion, you should have about 10 to 8 minutes left to check your work if it's possible. So some people are really good at doing math in their head without a calculator like this, and they can finish all those 20 problems in about 15 minutes or 17 minutes. And if they can do that, they're going to have 10 to 8 minutes left to check their work. Now, having 10 to 8 minutes left to check your work on the math no calculator section, that's ideal in my opinion. And if you can do it, your math is very solid. You can solve those problems very quickly. Then that's going to be great because if you have 10 to 8 minutes left to check your work, you're going to be able to check your bubble sheet. You're going to be able to make sure that what you circled in your booklet matches what you put in your bubble sheet. And you're going to be able to check any problems that were a little bit more difficult or that you went a little bit quickly through. And you're just going to be able to make sure that everything is correct as you want it to be. So that's very helpful. Now, some people can't finish that quickly. I fully acknowledge that. Now, I think that it's certainly possible to finish in 15, 17 minutes. I have videos where I go through solve the math no calculator section in about 10 minutes. I definitely think it's possible to finish in 15 to 17 minutes accurately, without question, especially once you learn the tips and tricks to the math section. So if you want to see those, go visit our 90-day prep course. I really outline a lot of the tricks you can use to solve them quicker in that course. So I recommend that. Now, let's say that you struggle to finish math no calculator section very quickly. Let's say it normally takes you about 20 minutes to finish all the questions. Well, once again, at least just try to make sure you have all the questions answered with 5 minutes left. Now, if you can, I understand for some people it's difficult, but if you can, try to finish all your questions and have 5 minutes left to check your work. If you can have 5 minutes left to check your work, that's really the minimum amount of time that you're going to want to have left. You want to have at least 5 minutes left to check your work, ideally 10 to 8. So what are you going to check in those final minutes? So you have this time left now to check your work. So now what does that mean? What are you going to do with it? Well, you don't want to just sit there. That's the last thing you want to do. Anytime that you're taking the SAT, the last thing you want to do is just sit there. Okay, that's being stagnant, and that's being, in my opinion, that is kind of being lazy, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're taking advantage of all the time the SAT is giving you, because it costs money to take the test unless you have a fee waiver. And either way, you're taking 3 hours out of your day to go take the test. And that time is money. We all know that. So you want to make sure that you're really taking advantage of all the time that you're in there for the SAT. So what are we going to check in the final minutes? Okay, the number one thing that you should check is you should check your bubble sheet. Okay, so checking your bubble sheet, I want to quick jump down to number 8 here and explain what I mean by this, because I actually have a strategy for bubbling, and that'll kind of help clarify what I mean by number 1 and 2 there. So let's go ahead and cover this real quick. So what do I mean by checking your bubble sheet and matching the bubble sheet to the booklet? What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at number 8 here, I say the importance of having a watch and bubbling strategy. So I want to cover bubbling strategy real quick. So yes, there is a bubbling strategy that I use and that I recommend people use. And yes, I am a try-hard with the SAT math section. I even have a bubble strategy, right? No, most people don't have a bubbling strategy. I do, okay? So here's what I recommend for my bubbling strategy, and I'll explain why as well. So I recommend you circle your answer in your booklet, right? So you go through, you solve a problem. Let's say you get the answer is A. You're going to circle A in your answer booklet, or I'm sorry, not in your answer booklet. In your test booklet, you're going to circle A. And then once you've answered all of the questions on that page, so generally there'll be about 4 problems on each page for the Math No Calculator section. Once you've answered the 4 problems on that page or 5 problems on that page, however many problems are on that page, then go ahead and bubble in those, okay? So after you've answered those 4 problems or so, you bubble in all your answers for those 1 through 4. Or those 5 through 8, or whatever the problems are. So you bubble those in on your answer sheet. So why do we do this? Well, we do this because if we're bubbling in each answer after we get it, then we're going to be jumping between our test booklet and our answer sheet multiple times, once after every question. But if we wait and we do it after we answered 4 questions on the same page, then we're taking less time to jump between the two. Okay? Because then we're just looking, we see we have, we go B-A-D-A. Then we just quick bubble in B-A-D-A, and we only have to switch between our answer sheet and our test booklet once rather than 4 times. So that's saving us time there. Okay, and if you think about that over the course of 20 questions, that's going to save you probably close to a minute. So saving a full minute there just by having a bubbling strategy, I'd say that that's a win, because you didn't really have to do any studying to save that minute. You just saved that minute through strategy. So that's something that I recommend. Now, where does this get tricky? Well, the only way that this really tricks you up is if you don't watch the time towards the end. So let's say that let's say you're struggling to finish all the questions in time. Let's say that you're down to about 1 minute left, right? Or let's say that you're at, let's say you have 10 minutes left or 8 minutes left. Okay, in my opinion, what I mean by having this watch, the importance of having a watch, you should start your watch hand. It has to be mechanical watch, so I always start it at midnight, right? So all my things are going to start at the 12. My second hand, minute hand, and hour hand will start at 12. Okay, so I'll press start, and now once I see that there's about 8 minutes left, or less than 8 minutes left, then after that, I abandon this bubbling strategy where I do I do a page and then answer in everything I had for that page. If there's less than 8 minutes left, then we want to fill it in after each question, because we don't want to get in a situation where we have 1 minute left and we have to try to fill in 4 questions or 4 bubbles, right? Because if our second hand's off, or if the proctor somehow selects it a couple seconds early, then we might not be able to fill in those 4. And even though we might have gotten those 4 answers correct in our test booklet, that's not going to get scored because we didn't have time to put it in the bubble sheet. So once there's less than 8 minutes left, at that point, you're going to want to fill in the bubble sheet after each question to avoid a situation where you've answered a question correctly but forgot to put it in the test booklet. So for the first 17 minutes of the test, you want to follow this strategy, in my opinion, of answering all the questions on a page, then bubbling them all in. And then once there's less than 8 minutes left, at that point, fill in the bubble sheet after each question. Okay, so that's my bubble sheet strategy. That's what I'd recommend doing. So now we can go back to 5, and I can explain a little bit more what I mean. So we talk about, we got 5 minutes left. Okay, so number 6 here, what to check in the final minutes. Okay, so the number one thing I'm going to recommend you check is you check to make sure that what you have answered in your test booklet matches your bubble sheet. So you're just going to quick run through your booklet, make sure that everything you filled in on your booklet, for example, making sure number 9 matches number 9 in your answer sheet. Number 9 in your booklet matches number 9 in your answer sheet. Number 10 in your booklet matches 10 in your answer sheet. Just making sure that those match because you don't want to accidentally have put in the wrong one. So just making sure that everything you put in your booklet, all the answers you circled there, matches what you put on your bubble sheet. Okay, so after you do that, that should only take you about a minute or less. After that, you're going to want to check your work. Okay, so at that point, check any problems that you were unsure of, check any problems that took a few steps that weren't super simple. Just go through, check everything, make sure it looks good. Make sure you didn't make any simple errors. All right, so then the next thing that I talked about is number 7, right? We skipped down to 8 just because I thought that we should talk about that before 6, but for number 7, I have a very, very key thing here. Be careful, okay? Why do we need to be careful? What do we need to be careful of? Be careful of trying to change an answer with less than a minute left, okay? Let's say that you have an answer choice down, you're going through, you're checking your work, there's about a minute left, you're pretty much checking one of your last problems. Now with a minute left, ideally you would have checked everything, but let's say you're still checking and you say, oh man, I think I might have made a mistake here. Now, if you might have made a mistake and you're not totally sure that you've made that mistake, then don't try to change your answer if there's like 10 seconds left, right? And this is why I recommend starting that watch, that mechanical watch, with the second hand on midnight as well, okay? Now, I know that that's very, very, pretty much a very, very I'm trying to think of a good word here, a very, very strict detail, right? Starting that second hand at midnight, but doing so is really going to make sure that you understand if you've got a minute left and you started your second hand at midnight, then you're going to know exactly how many seconds you have left. So you'll know if you have time to quick change it with your answer sheet. So that's why I recommend starting your hour hand, minute hand, and second hand at that midnight, because then you can really, really know how much time you have left down to the second. So if you got 30 seconds, you can probably quick erase an answer on your answer sheet and quick put in the other bubble. So that's why you got to make sure that you're just careful, because if you've only got 5 seconds, you might be able to erase, but you might not be able to fill in. So just be careful trying to change answers with less than a minute left. It's certainly still possible to do, especially if you started your watch at midnight with the second hand as well, because then you can see how many seconds you have left. So that's one tip there. So with that, that really covers pretty much all of the pacing that we're going to want to know for that SAT math no calculator section. Okay, so the big things that you should really put in your notes if you're taking notes on this, in my opinion, would be, first of all, understanding how the difficulty of the questions are arranged. Now keep in mind, you can put in this equivalency chart that I basically made if you want. Keep in mind it's my opinion. Okay, this is my opinion. So I would put that in if you want. But the big thing that you really want to understand is just this approach that I recommend. Okay, so I'm going to put a big star here. Okay, that's the big thing I'd put in your notes if I were you, is just the approach that I suggest taking. So I'd include this 1 through 3 and then this A through B, right, of that 3, as well as these right here. So that's what I recommend there. I would make sure that you really put that approach in your notes if you want to adopt it. And then you don't really have to include why the approach is smart if you included that equivalency table, right, because you'll understand that, and I explained that to you. And then other than that, just make sure that you try to have some time left to check your work. Make sure you're checking your bubble sheet when you have that time left. Another tip that I think is important is just making sure you're starting your watch with everything at midnight. I think that that's important as well. So with that, hopefully that was helpful. If you want to find our 90-day SAT prep course, you can find it in our channel. It's a playlist, so just go to playlist. You'll be able to find it there. And with that, make sure to like, subscribe, and share for more content. And as always, have a good day. Any private SAT tutoring I'm doing will be linked in the description, and any private college admissions consulting I'm doing will also be linked in the description.